Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back promptly. In fact, we have another 20 seconds, but I'll use them to introduce myself. I'm Enrica Alteri. I'm head here at the agency, the Human Medicines R&D Support Division, so very topical for the forthcoming talks. And the way we'll arrange this session, here, just as every other session, we want a lot of questions and a lot of interaction. So the speakers will be banged in the head after 10 minutes. So they are not allowed to talk more than a few minutes and just introduce the topics. But really the important part is to get feedback from you and questions from you. So two of the speakers actually are at EMA in my division, Stina Arum and Falk Heman, and another speaker is part of one of the leading lights of one of our committees here at the agency, but is not part of EMA in itself. So we start with Stina Arum, Dr. Stina Arum. She's in the Scientific Advice here at the agency, and she will talk about guidance to R&D programs, scientific advice, qualification of novel technologies, and biomarkers, and the PRIME scheme. So thank you, Stina, for accepting that, and welcome here.
Thank you, Enrica.
Yeah, here.
Okay, thank you, Enrica and Agnes, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and tell you about scientific advice and the PRIME network. As already mentioned, this presentation will introduce you to scientific advice and specific developments such as parallel EMA-HTA scientific consultation, qualification of novel methodologies and biomarkers, modeling and simulation, and finally about the priority medicine scheme, the PRIME. This figure illustrates the typical long road of bringing medicines to patients. And to the right, you can see the regulatory assessment that is conducted by the CHMP at the end of the development, followed by approval by the European Commission. In Europe, this is commonly followed by reimbursement discussions with the health technology assessment bodies and the launch of the product before the product actually can get access to the patients. This is, as you understand, a very long and expensive process, and in order to target the risk of development failures and the time to access of the new medicines to the patients, we have procedures such as scientific advice and the PRIME scheme. Scientific advice was started in 1996 in order to improve the communication between the developers and the regulators. The legal basis is in the Regulation 726 from 2004, which says that one of the tasks of the agency is to advise undertakings on the conduct of the various tests and trials necessary to demonstrate the quality, safety, and efficacy of medicinal products. This is voluntary and prospective in nature. It focuses on development strategies rather than pre-evaluation of data to support the marketing authorization application. We advise applicants on the scientific requirements for marketing authorization before the first marketing authorization. We commonly have questions on manufacturing issues, non-clinical and clinical trials, risk management plans, ways to develop generics, hybrids, and biosimilars. We can also have specific questions on development of medicines for rare patient populations or, for example, pediatric patients. After the initial marketing authorization, the company can come back and ask to discuss with us extensions of indications to different age groups and stages of disease, as well as into different conditions or safety aspects of the product. this one. So this figure illustrates the Scientific Advice network. Scientific advice or protocol assistance, which is scientific advice for orphan drugs, is given by the CHMP on the recommendation of the Scientific Advice Working Party. Scientific Advice Working Party, it's a multidisciplinary expert group, and it is supported by Scientific Secretariat here in the agency. We can also involve experts and clinicians, and you will hear more, I think, from Dieter about this later on. And we also collaborate with not only the CHMP, but other working parties and committees of the agency. We also commonly involve patients and the HTA bodies in our scientific advices. So the Scientific Advice Working Party has experts from national authorities, universities and hospitals who are selected for their specific expertise in a certain field of medicine or methodology. We also have joint members across committees in not only the CHMP, but also the other committees of the agency. And the logistic and scientific support is provided by the EMA Secretariat, and we are medical doctors or pharmacists and assistants. This study looked at the 118 marketing authorization applications between 2008 and 2012 in order to study the marketing authorization application success and compared to whether the product had received and followed the scientific advice. And our colleagues looked at the key variables of the development, such as the primary efficacy endpoint, the comparator, and the robustness of the statistical methodology. And they looked whether the initial scientific advice had been considered acceptable or non-acceptable with regards to these variables, and then whether the company had been following the given advice or not, if they had been compliant to the advice given, and how that affected the marketing authorization outcome at the end. And the results showed that obtaining and complying with scientific advice was strongly associated with the positive outcome of a marketing authorization application. Almost 90% of those who obtain and follow scientific advice receive a positive opinion, compared to 40% of those who do not follow the given advice. Scientific advice has turned out to be a popular activity of the agency, and as you can see, the numbers have been increasing every year, and last year we had more than 600 scientific advice and protocol assistance procedures. Then I would say a few words about the parallel EMA HTA scientific consultation. So the starting point for this type of interaction was that the newly licensed medicines do not reach all patients in need. And this one reason for this is that the developers were not able to satisfy the evidence needs of the health technology body, assessors and the payers. The regulators and HTAs, we answer different questions. The regulators, we look at the quality, safety and efficacy of the product, while the HTAs and the payers look at the cost effectiveness and the added value of a new product. So we do have different requirements in terms of evidence. And the aim of this interaction is to make the decision makers come together early to discuss the planned development, including populations, comparators, design of the trial and endpoints, as well as the requirements for post-licensing evidence generation, in order to reach an optimized development plan that would satisfy the different evidence requirements and improve the access for patients at the very end. For those of you who are interested, I would recommend this publication from 2016, which looked at the time from the EU regulatory approval to national HTA and pricing and reimbursement decisions for oncology products in some European countries. And as you can see from the table at the bottom, it takes a certain number of months before the access is actually there. What constitutes a success in this type of parallel EMA-HTA interactions? Since the initiation of the parallel advice in 2010, there have been already many positive steps. So there is a good understanding of roles, remits, and standards of each other. There is a common language, understanding of methodology, and also understanding of science and methodology. But then this may still be finally differently applied. And what is a success is that we would agree on a development plan that would satisfy the different evidence needs of the different stakeholders in one development plan, and that we would avoid the sequential thinking in the development to satisfy the different stakeholders, and that the development plan would still be feasible to conduct, and that the evidence is generated without any undue delay. And the alignment of the perspectives of the EU regulators and HTA bodies has been published in this paper by Tafuri in 2016 for those of you who are interested. The regulation does not only allow us to give advice on a specific development of a new product, but we can also, in scientific advice, discuss broader topics in drug development and utilization. And this is what the qualification of novel methodologies and biomarkers is about. So it's a procedure to guide the development of new, more efficient ways to develop drugs. For example, development of new endpoints for clinical trials. There have been cases where it's been discussed, for example, a method to predict toxicity, a biomarker that would be inclusion criteria to enrich a patient population in a clinical trial. There have been cases to discuss surrogate clinical endpoints or patient and caregiver reported outcomes. So this can either lead to a qualification advice, which, as it says, gives further advice on protocols, how to reach a qualification. Ultimately, the CHMP may be able to give a qualification opinion on the acceptability of a specific use of the proposed method, such as a biomarker, in a research and development context, based on the assessment of submitted data. And the applicants are commonly consortia, networks, public and private partnerships, learned societies, as well as pharmaceutical industry. And there have been 122 procedures since the start in 2008. Then I will move on to the modeling and simulation and the regulatory value. So this is very much about PK and PD discussions. The companies use it to make their drug development more efficient, while for the regulators it is of interest to understand, for example, how the dose and the dose regimen has been reached, and to understand where the company comes from. In early discussions before the marketing authorization applications, we can have modeling and simulation questions to discuss certain. Is there a question? Oh, speed up. Yes, I will speed up. Certain aspects of the clinical trial design, At the marketing authorization, at the stage of marketing authorization application, this can support benefit risk decisions by investigating uncertainties and untested scenarios, or to support subgroup analysis. Post-marketing, it is commonly about life cycle management of products. Then I would move on to the eligibility of Priority Medicines Prime scheme. So this is a scheme that is for innovative, promising products who would be able to fulfill an unmet medical need. And in this scheme, we offer these products enhanced regulatory and scientific support. The legal base is accelerated assessment, and we would first look at the condition, whether there is an unmet medical need, or if, so for example, quite commonly there are conditions where there is nothing available for the patients at the moment. If there is something already existing, some treatment, then we would expect this product to bring a major therapeutic advantage, such as meaningful improvement of efficacy with regards to the impact of onset or duration of the disease, or improving morbidity or mortality. We have two different entry points. We have two different entry points for the Prime scheme. For any sponsor, and this is also where we have most of the applications, the common entry point is at the proof of concept stage. And we would then have clinical efficacy data from the exploratory trials, which would support that this product will bring a substantial improvement in the treatment of the patients, and that the results would be of substantial magnitude, duration, and relevance, clinically relevant. For academic sponsors, as well as for SME sponsors who commonly need more support from our side, we do accept an earlier entry stage, which would be based on non-clinical proof of principle data and first of tolerability and tolerability data in first-in-man trials. For these products, we do offer, well, of course, written confirmation. We do have early CHMP rapporteur appointment. We have kickoff meeting, and this will be followed by enhanced scientific advice. There is an EMA dedicated contact point and also fee incentives available. Since, well, by January this year, we have had more than 160 eligibility requests. We have granted 34 products the eligibility into the scheme, and most commonly these products are in the field of oncology. The success rate is 22% of the applications. So in summary, scientific advice is a key tool to promote the collection of robust data on the benefits and risks of medicine. It benefits patients as it promotes the generation of robust data and protects them from participating in badly designed or irrelevant clinical trials. It is the key platform for our collaboration with health technology assessment bodies, which aims to facilitate patients' access to new medicines. It is also a central activity to stimulate innovation, and regulatory incentive via Prime is possible for medicinal products of major public health interest, and in particular from the viewpoint of therapeutic innovation. Thank you. I think this was all.
So thank you, Stina, and you stay here, and we leave time for questions. You probably felt that there was a lot of information out there, and indeed there was. So all the more is important that we dig on some aspects that you consider particularly important or interesting to you.
So you understand that we have this general procedure of scientific advice to support the development, but we also have this a new element to really facilitate innovation in the area of unmet needs. So it's a more selective approach to development where we will nurture the development of the product. Again, goes back to the question of conflict of interest that was mentioned before. Do we engage with companies and make it a conflict of interest for us, or do we actually make it a greater chance for patients to get the product that is really meeting needs? So there is a selection process which Stina has shown with the figures, and we are quite selective when we decide to put a prime designation on a product.
Gilly Spurrier, Melanoma Patient Network Europe. I just wanted to ask you, you said you had most of your applications for prime coming from any person rather than SMEs and research. Do you have an idea of the percentage that you're getting on these applications?
Yes, so actually we do on the left-hand side at the bottom, you can see that we do have almost equal numbers from SME sponsors and other sponsors. What I meant was that when it comes to the stage of development, we do see most of the applications coming in the exploratory, phase 2 to development. So we do not see very many of the applications that are based on non-clinical data and only tolerability in man.
Well, I have a question. I don't know whether this question is pertinent or not, actually, because for the conflict of interest is a very tricky question, because whether you are an expert, for everybody. So you are an expert for the companies, you are an expert for EMA, you are an expert for. So it's a very complicated issue, and if you are not an expert, then you're not going to have any conflict of interest, but you have nothing to bring to anybody. Now, my question was, again, I'm not sure it's pertinent, but members of the scientific advice, how are they appointed to this position? They are selected in which way? Because this is also important in terms of transparency. They are proposed by other bodies. They are, I don't know.
They are appointed by their expertise in a specific field of medicine. By the EMA, but we have a number of candidates, and also there are always there may be a specific need in a certain field of medicine which is not currently represented. So in that case, we would look at the candidates that have applied, which do present that competence that is needed.
They have applied, so there is a way of applying.
I'll explain. The members of the committees first are proposed by the member state for the representative of a member state. The members of the committees who are not from a member state, like patient or health professional, are generally selected on a call for expression interest managed by the European Commission. For working parties, the member state can propose experts. They can be regulators, meaning they are employed by the agency. They can still be experts, it happens. And you have external experts coming from academia, but proposed by the member states. And then there is we look at the competences, and there is a choice, a vote made by the members of the committee on the one that are selected. But the working party for scientific advice, not the case of all working parties, but this one is only based on expertise. The number is not a function of the member state. So you may have 3 members from Germany and 1 from Malta, but no member from France. That's possible because what counts at the end for scientific advice is the expertise of the members.
Gerardi from Mario Negri Institute. Are data on scientific advice public available in some document as the European Public Assessment Report?
No, well, this is confidential information because it is the property of the. Well, maybe you want to elaborate on this.
I understand where your question is coming from, and we are very committed to put to the knowledge that is gained about the advice given to a particular product. We are very keen to put it back to benefit others, to benefit the public ultimately. And we do it in various ways. Number one, the information that we get from these products that we give advice on, of course, it results or not in successful application. So we do have a circle that closes and we get a learning from what works and what doesn't work. That learning we put into our guidelines. So our guidelines do not come from thin air. They come from this accumulated experience over a number of products, a number of years, that looks not only at the design, but actually at the results. So this is a first very important mechanism whereby we put back the knowledge in the public domain whenever we actually do learn from the results. Don't forget that scientific advice is given not on data and not on results, but on design. So you actually, what you would put into the public domain at the moment that scientific advice is given is of use only when the results come in later on after a number of years, and then you do realize whether what you have done is actually of value or not. And at that point, we are also committed to put more information on the EPAR. So when a product is actually approved, we do put some information on the scientific advice, and we are committed to expand that part of the information that we put on the EPAR. So this is work in progress, and as any process, you can always improve, and we are committed to improve it and to put more into the public domain to the benefit of developers and ultimately, of course, most importantly, on the patients.
Maybe I can add a general principle of law in terms of confidential information. Normally, what is before approval and which concern development plan is considered confidential. That's why we are not allowed to release. In fact, we have actually released more and more information. And for example, in pediatrics, we explain what we are doing in the pediatric area, where even before approval. So we are already opening some transparency on this area. This is why, although we would like to be more transparent, we cannot necessarily breach the law to do that. Okay.
I'm Paolo Colombo from Italy. I am the founder of a startup company. And this startup company last year got an orphan designation. And then after orphan designation, we got the protocol assistance in order to develop the product. So my question is very simple. What is the advantage for our company to enter in the PRIME scheme instead to continue to develop the protocol assistance?
Well, with PRIME, you would get the early appointment of the CHMP rapporteur, and we would also provide you with enhanced regulatory and scientific input from the network. So in the kickoff meeting, we do have the representatives of the different committees, and we can more in an informal way give you guidance on what we think are the next steps, and this would then be followed by normal scientific advices where the details would be discussed, for example, of your pivotal trial design.
Last question, and then we move on.
Fabrizio De Ponti, clinical pharmacologist, University of Bologna. I was considering the numbers, the figures in the slide that you showed before. Only 3 applications were received from academia, and they were denied PRIME accessibility. So I would like to know, as a representative of academia, where the problem was and what we can do to improve the interaction with EMA.
Well, I think I would prefer not to draw major conclusions based on the 3 applications.
No, of course.
But definitively, I think we would like to see more applications from the academia. And if you are thinking of applying, you may contact the Prime Secretariat.
But I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
The point is, why just a few applications, only 3?
I think actually in the next couple of presentations we have more insight into that. So it's a perfect bridge for the next 2 presentations.
I have no input on that in my presentation, but I just wanted to maybe state that also in the SMEs and even in the others, there is of course academic input. There's a lot of academic starting research, which then boils over into SME spin-off companies which are started. So here the academic means purely academic without any spin-off company in between, right? So
the reason to refuse prime access were generally based on the fact that either we didn't consider it was an unmet need, meaning there were alternatives and existing products. Second, sometimes the development was so advanced that there was no point in looking at how we can influence the development because it was already done. So that's the kind of reason we have seen. I cannot answer on the 3 academics, and certainly we're disappointed because the objective is to help academia, but they may not be the right ones at that time. So please, if you have projects, come early.
And come to ITF, and then that perfectly frames the next Dr. Falkeman, who will in fact introduce you to another aspect of the support that we wish to give to developers and particularly to SMEs and academics. So Falk, please.
Thank you very much. Indeed, having a look at the list of participants, so basically at you, it's very encouraging that a lot of you are from academia, and this is maybe something I'm trying to focus on my talk. I'd like to start with a statement that regulators are not only gatekeepers, but are indeed enablers. And without going into detail of this figure, there's a constantly changing landscape in pharmaceutical R&D, like in all of our lives. And we took a proactive regulatory approach to address these, to enable different developments by addressing unmet regulatory needs. And one of them is or has been the creation of the Innovation Task Force here at the European Medicines Agency more than 10 years ago. And trying to put this into one sentence, what we're trying to do or to achieve or what we are a multidisciplinary platform for preparatory dialogue. So even earlier, if you wish, so what we just heard from Scientifc Advice, to provide dialogue and orientation. And I really like to emphasize that it's not only on medicines, but includes methods and technologies, which are innovative and should be linked to drug development. So our objectives: assist knowledge exchange within the network, support drug development, as mentioned, in a scientific, legal, and regulatory aspect. We've seen a lot of very relevant, interesting developments which should help the patients, which are not clearly defined in terms of which jurisdiction they should follow. Are they a device? Are they a medicinal product? Are they something in between? Are they cosmetics? Are they food? Are they food supplement, and so on? So this is really something we're trying to assist as well. Then we're trying to address the impact of these emerging science and prepare our system, the regulatory network, and beyond for these coming products. So on the left here, I'd like to focus on this figure. Is an analysis performed by our SME office, and I understand you either had or will have a session on SME during this meeting. And what I'd like to highlight is here that the blue bars are indicating where product ideas originate from, and the red bar are who brought them finally to the marketing authorization, as we know, most likely 12 years, 15 years after the original ideas emerged. And if you look at the 3 left parts of the graph, of the x-axis, which summarized by SMEs, academia, and private collaboration. So if you wish, show the smaller developers of these new medicines, they have more than 50% of the original ideas who make it in the end, maybe 15 years later, to the marketing authorization, which are represented here in red. So what I want to say is that we're trying to facilitate and support these early developers on an early stage in the hope they make it to the market in the longer term and benefit to the patients. Just to highlight the multidisciplinary form of the ITF, so beside different therapeutic areas, the legals, the regulatory part, we reach out to really different parts of the network. And here I try to summarize them. So it's not only the committees, working parties, and experts within the system, as highlighted before, it's as well research organizations, other EU institutions, the Joint Research Center, food chemical agencies, other expertise from international regulators, and other institutions. So we're really flexible here in trying to get the expertise, because these products are highly innovative, and unfortunately they have a high attrition rate, but nevertheless we're trying to push this down. So the main task, if we receive a request from you, from anybody, can be academia, can be private consortia, can be even one single individuum as part of a university, we consult together with our colleagues from Scientifc Advice and other colleagues within the system, and if considered relevant and of value to be supported at this stage, we invite them for an informal meeting. And again, we are very flexible for the dates, for the times, and how this is done, either in face-to-face or sometimes, I mean, they come from around the world, from US or Japan. Maybe it's better to do it via webinar. Another part we are involved in, I don't like to focus on today, is the 18P classification. So gene, cell, and tissue engineered products. I think there will be more focus on the next session of this program. Just to highlight that there are a lot of borderline discussions as well. Are they tissue engineered products? Do they fall under the tissue directive? Are they transplants, and so on? So it's a very gray area. And with emerging technologies, it becomes really important, and this is maybe one major take-home message I learned in the last years, that you know as early as possible what jurisdictions are responsible for you to put your product, at least on the European market, and therefore know what kind of scientific requirements you will be exposed to in order to bring this product to the market. This is just to highlight that indeed, looking at the far right bar, 2016, that we have equal participation in these briefing meetings of academia, colleagues in-house, or external expertise to be dialed in. So what is the impact? We have around 30 meetings per year and receive about double the amount of requests. And as highlighted, 80% of them are academia, SMEs, or consortia, so exactly our target group in this early stage. What is the follow-up from these interactions? Maybe I'd just like to highlight 2 or 3 things. So about a third will go to Scientifc Advice on a later stage. 10% on qualification of methodologies, so for example, biomarker, novel technologies, which has been presented just before from the Scientifc Advice colleagues. And a bigger proportion I didn't highlight here is as well referred to member states or to other jurisdictions, to notified bodies, to device authorities, to member states for clinical trial authorization, and so on. So how do we try to inform the system and try to really ensure what we do is funneled through and has a tangible impact at the end? We have a tracking database, and we trying to do something like an intelligence gathering once a year, where we look at whether there's any trend. And of course, in order to do so, 30 meetings is not that much, but we look, of course, at the scientific advices we provided. We have now a network between similar centers, which has been set up recently within the EU, within the different member states. And these innovation offices now are connected. So I think together we can really achieve much more, and trying to do this horizon scanning and looking if there's a trend and prepare the system. So I think, as highlighted before, making this to the public available, there are trainings, there are awareness sessions, there are workshops, and of course, if we see a lot of signals via the ITF, via the scientific advice, as mentioned before, we draft guidance. And if you really carefully look out what kind of workshops the EMA or the system organizes, for example, genome editing, companion diagnostics, novel tools in non-clinical development, patient on a chip. So these are signals. We don't do this, as mentioned, out of thin air. So there has to be a reason to justification why we do this. And this comes, I think, from these kind of early interactions, at least partially. So to finish, as mentioned again, we don't only look what it's there and serve to put it through the system in a regulatory manner. We really try to enable and we try to engage as early as possible, as mentioned before. We are very open to early discussions, not only on scientific issues, regulatory issues, technical, and sometimes the legal aspect is really important for you as a very early stage. And one of these tools is the ITF, and yeah, we are a network. We engage with everybody in the system. So whoever you come first, we will see it and we will direct in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Falk. Questions? Please.
Thank you. Again, Dubravka, HMA. I would like to ask whether this innovation task force at EMA still exists alone or whether it merged with this EU innovation network.
So I think a very good question. And indeed, I think last year it has been, it is one member of a network. So we are existing for quite a long time, but different member states within the EU for the time being have similar offices developed. And it's very, very interesting to see. Some of them are focused on ATMPs, others on HTA environment, others on early drug development in the non-clinical models. So I think it's an incredible enrichment, and we are one member of this, of this team, and it potentiates these things.
Please.
Yes, thank you very much. It's Maya Than from King's College London. And I noticed that you are having international collaborators like the US Nanotechnology Characterization Lab, but are you familiar, or do you collaborate as well with the European Nanotechnology Characterization Lab?
Very good question. I apologize if I didn't list them, but absolutely. So via them, we went to the US lab. And it's true, the US lab was first. So, I mean, they have a lot of experience we would like to gain. And I think the science has no borders, if you wish. So we're really trying to get the best expertise. If you're King's College in the UK, maybe you have developed something we don't have in Europe more than US. So we try to get the people from there. Nevertheless, wanting, of course, to see you first in Europe.
Okay, one general question, maybe to the previous presentation regarding the HTA thinking. What do you mean? Do you mean the new HTA proposal regulation will be soon in place and will be EMA involved? A coordination group is foreseen to be developed. Do you know what is the future of this, process?
Oops. I think it's a little bit too early to put these two things together. So the implementation, I mean, the new regulation is a proposal for the time being, as you know. So we are looking at a very long time until it actually becomes a regulation and then it is implemented. So we don't think that will stop us from keeping the interactions we have currently with the HTA bodies and UNETA in particular, in specific procedures. So we are now focusing, rather than on the process, we are focusing on the products and on interaction that we can have on specific procedures. So the two things are not mutually exclusive, but our experience with UNETA and with the procedures is actually we think it will be beneficial in informing how this interaction will take shape when the time comes. Any other questions? So we move on to the last presentation of today. Professor Dieter de Vors is in University of Ghent in Belgium and is member of the Scientific Advice Working Party that we were discussing before, and he will speak specifically on the role of academic experts in scientific advice. So this will conclude very nicely our session for today.
Sorry, forgot the microphone. I'm an academic. So as stated, I'm here to explain a little bit the role of academic experts in scientific advice. And I'm one of these academic people in the Scientific Advice Working Party. And you could have selected others because there's many of us academic experts present in scientific advice. So here I already started with the summary, I would say, of my presentation, so that at least you have that. I depicted here in yellow, kind of goldish color, where academic experts are or can be involved in the process of scientific advice. So you see here the applicant, because one of the questions was why we had so few academic applications. Well, of course, it's also because a lot of academic expertise comes to EMA and scientific advice via a spin-off or even via larger companies. So I guess even in the applicant for scientific advice, there is a role for academic experts directly as providers, I would say, of the research that led to a certain medicine or development of a certain medicine, but also as experts for companies. We also see that companies, when coming for scientific advice, often do involve external experts, and with external I mean external to the own company. They use clinical experts and they use academic experts also, of course, to come to scientific advice procedures. And then for the Scientific Advice Working Party, I've depicted here also that part of the members are academics, actually. It depends a little bit on the country, maybe, because there was also a question for smaller countries, how are we involved in EMA organization and in the overall decision process? Well, for Belgium, I'm from Belgium, which is a rather small country, I would say. For scientific advice, for example, we have 4 members. 2 of us are academics and 2 are internal people from the national competent authority. So having external experts and academics could be a way also for smaller agencies to have a sufficiently large involvement, I would say, in decision process, for example, at larger agencies such as the European Medicines Agency. And then, of course, the process of scientific advice, which I will talk about a little bit more in detail, also involves assessors. So we also go to external experts outside of the Scientific Advice Working Party itself to help us in assessment of the questions that are posed. And quite often these assessors can also be academics or people in clinical research. And then you see on the right-hand side, of course it's not readable, but that there is a large interaction with other committees and working parties and other groups within the EMA. And also there I depicted a yellow goldish bar depicting that also in these committees and other working parties and groups, academics and clinical experts are of course present. Scientific advice then goes back to CHMP, where again we will find academic experts. I know that, for example, for the Belgian agency, the member is also an academic person. So the role of the academics, as I explained, we can be members of the Scientific Advice Working Party. Somebody asked how we are appointed, and it was explained that we are proposed by the national authorities, and I've seen I don't have exact numbers of the proportion of academics and what I call external experts in Scientific Advice Working Party, but we are definitely not exceptions. There's a large proportion of us who are not considered to be internal to national authorities or regulators. For example, also in Belgium, we also involve a lot of external experts as assessors. External experts, meaning again external from the national agency. Those would be again academics or people active in a clinic. Of course, there, as already was alluded to, conflicts of interests are a big issue, and I think there's also within our group often the discussion, of course, the more you are an expert, the higher the likelihood that you will have a conflict of interest. We always have to find the balance between that. Most important is, of course, that conflicts of interest are declared and known, and that if people would take, let's say, certain points that are maybe deviant, if you know that there's a conflict of interest, you can take that into account in the final decision process. And as I've also explained, since academics and clinical people are involved also by companies, of course, conflicts of interest tend to be an issue. Academics are also members of CHMP, and as you might probably know, scientific advice is always issued in the end by CHMP, so it's again looked at also in CHMP by some academic experts. And then as members of working parties and other groups, I've shown you on the right of the previous slide that there's quite some working parties and other groups in which, again, academic experts can be involved. I've stated here that academic experts and non-academic experts are present as members in the Scientific Advice Working Party. And in between, what do I mean with in between? There are academic people who have part-time appointments in national agencies. There's also people who are, let's say, employees of national agencies who have part-time academic appointments. So that's what I mean with the in-between, people having, let's say, two hats, at least two hats. And we involve experts in different fields. So it's not only clinicians. Scientific advice also gets questioned, for example, on quality aspects. So we have experts also on quality, biologics and non-biologics. We have experts on non-clinical aspects. We have experts, of course, on the clinical studies to be conducted. Most of them would, of course, be clinicians then that are involved. And also statistics is an important point. So typically we will have experts specifically for statistical questions posed to us. And I didn't depict it here, but for example, also PK, of course, is an important field where we have to find input and where we involve experts. And experts, again, could be in-house in national agencies, but could also, of course, be external experts being present in academia or other societies. If we speak about assessors, we can use internal assessors. Those would be staff of national agencies if we speak about internal. Some of these national agencies have internal staff that have part-time clinical appointments. And as I explained, also some of these people will have part-time academic appointments. And then for the external experts, meaning external to the national agencies, we will have assessors with academic appointments or also clinical appointments, which are not necessarily academic appointments. So we are allowed to use, let's say, the whole diversity of experts which are out there. And for example, again, in the case you have a smaller agency, a smaller country, being able to use external experts means that you can have sufficient capacity to contribute to a system. So in Belgium, we use a lot of external experts, which gives us, even if we're a smaller country, sufficient capacity to actually participate, for example, in scientific advice. Then how is a scientific advice? I was thinking of putting born here, but decided to keep it a little bit more dry and saying the making of a scientific advice. So in general, if a scientific advice is coming to the SAWP, 2 members are appointed as coordinators. They will take the advice back home and then involve the necessary internal or external experts. And for example, if you have a scientific advice procedure where there's quality questions, non-clinical questions, and clinical questions, we will typically involve several experts, of course. Those experts will then provide responses to the questions for the fields where they are specifically expert in. The coordinators are then responsible to draft a first report based on the answers received from the experts in the field. And then we come, actually, it's almost finished now, the Scientific Advice Working Party for this month. We come to this place and we discuss our first reports in the whole group. And then there's two possible outcomes. The first outcome is we are able to find an agreement between the two coordinator reports and we go for a joint report. Or we decide that we need more information to come to a final, let's say, advice, and then we organize a discussion meeting with the company or the applicant. So if we have, or if we decide to go for a discussion meeting, we will involve additional SAWP members in that discussion meeting. We will also involve assessors who are first already present to make the first reports or to provide the answers, but also additional experts. And these additional experts could again be external academic experts or of course also internal to agencies. And very important also patient representatives. And then we will invite the company and we will discuss with the company together with the experts, assessors and the patient representatives the specific issues which we need further input on to decide what the advice will be. And then we go to a joint report. To come to these joint reports, we will most of the times involve also other working parties and groups. And the idea is that we come to a consensus between the coordinators, so the two coordinators, but also a consensus with the whole SAWP group and also all other input we have received during the discussion in the SAWP group. And of course also consensus between the assessors who were involved in the first assessment of the report. Then we have a peer review in process where again other members of SAWP and CHMP review the report and can start a discussion if some things are still not, let's say, fully clear or maybe still controversial. It is discussed again at CHMP and then a final advice letter is drafted and sent to the applicant. I think having external experts and maybe more specific academic experts is a win-win for scientific advice and for maybe regulatory agencies in general. It brings clinical practice to the decision. It also brings recent scientific developments. For the external academic experts, I also think there's a huge win in participating in this system. You get to see the latest developments in industry, in clinical trials. And I think also very important, maybe because you alluded to the fact, give us information on how to do it better. I think that if academics are more involved in the regulatory process, it will also be a win for them to come to better development of products if they go that direction. So I think exchange of expertise is very important and that both sides, if you can speak about sides here, I don't like speaking about sides, but I'm quite sure that also academic experts have profits from being involved in the system. So here I didn't have, my ideal plan was to color also in yellow the academic people, but this is a list of names of the members of the Scientific Advice Working Party. But I must be honest that I didn't have time to look through each and everybody's individual appointment, but a large proportion of them would be external experts. So if you have questions, I would say ask scientific advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you very much. Please stay here. And questions, we have plenty of time. And maybe we can even make a longer lunch break. I don't know. Yes, will be up to you. But plenty of questions first. Yes, go ahead. Shoot.
Maybe I can make a comment also. You've seen that for scientific advice, but it's also true for our committees. We always choose two independent teams to assess the first part of the first application. So and then they come together at the committee and they discuss, and then we do a joint outcome. But the first initial are two independent assessments. And that's also an added value. And we're again back to conflict of interest and to potentially having added value by having different views. And very often we see that on the main thing they generally are in agreement, but they may have a different look at some of the data, and they will highlight one point and the other one will highlight another point, and that at the end will make the value and the richness of our advertising. And I think experts here come also with a different angle from regulators.
Dieter, one of the major drawbacks I see in the system is the fact that the applicant, the advice requester, is not able to request a discussion meeting. If you compare that with the national advices in Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, Sweden, they start with a discussion meeting. Yeah? And here you have to put the paper on the table, and EMA will decide whether they want to see you. And sometimes the applicant would like to have a discussion, to go into discussion with the agency. And sometimes it's no.
Well, I must say to that, of course, in theory, the situation as you have sketched it, but in practice, I understood that the SAWP Secretariat has contacts with the companies, and companies can express the, let's say, wish to have a discussion meeting. We also are quite open to discussion meetings. So if there is doubt, let's say, on the usefulness of having a discussion meeting, we tend to have the discussion meeting. We don't always go for a discussion meeting if it's very clear what the advice will be, independently of what the company can tell us. And of course, also if we are very much in agreement with the proposal of the company, we will draft a joint report and stating that we in large lines agree with the proposals of the company. When we tend to disagree, we most of the times will ask for a discussion meeting with the company. But in theory, it's as you stated, maybe the company cannot specifically demand a discussion meeting.
Maybe that draws us also to one of the specificity of the European system. Very much our system is a written system, and we have meetings once a month here at the agency for 2 or 3 days or 4 days for the committees. So the experts are not available 5 days a week, a working week. And we have to pack everything in the week of the meeting, which means that for operational reasons, we may not meet as many companies as we would like to sometimes, just because we don't have the time. So we prioritize on the one where the discussion is going to lead to potentially a better understanding, changes, or a disagreement, rather than the one with whom, when it's nice to see them, but we don't have really fundamentally a disagreement.
Maybe Stina can add to that.
Yes, I would just like to add that we also offer the possibility to come for a pre-submission meeting ahead of your submission for scientific advice. So in the best case, we may be able to answer some of your questions already in that meeting, and at least we would be able to understand and further forward into the discussion at the Scientific Advice Working Party, where your main most important issues lie.
And also, I mean, spare a thought for 600 advice per year in couple of dozen people. So you also need to see the question from our perspective, and it would be nice to accommodate everybody's wish, but we can't. So we take a risk-based approach, as my three colleagues have explained.
So I would like just to ask, so my name is Professor Benišva, coming from Bulgarian Medical University. My question is regarding how some members of Scientific Working Party are proposed. Am I thinking in the way of make this way more flexible, the academia to, to apply themselves, not via the agency, because, this is at the end political decision, because the chiefs of the agency are changed even in the small countries very often. And maybe you could extend the portfolio of the experts and to choose for the different, so for the different examples, different experts. Because I have seen many questions was put how the experts are chosen, how they're proposed, but via the agency, then it's a limitation of such experts. I see this as a problem regarding the scientific advice.
Yeah, maybe I can say something on that aspect. Of course, it's important as a member of the Scientific Advice Working Party that you have the backup of an agency back home so that you are able, because not all coordinatorships we take are specifically in our own expertise, because there's a lot of, if you have, say, for example, we have quality, non-clinical and clinical questions. Of course, not one coordinator can be the expert on all these aspects. So that means that you need capacity back home to distribute the workload over other people, other experts, other assessors. So it is important that I think people present in the Scientific Advice Working Party and probably also in other committees have sufficient backup back home to support in coming to reports and in being able to have the expertise available and the time also available for these people to help you out. So I think if you would have a academic non-backup with a system back home, that you would be in a very difficult situation. It is, however, different to, and that's why I also said if we have a discussion meeting, that we also involve additional experts, then of course you don't need to have specific backup. And at least in Belgium, as a coordinator, I'm very free. The agency doesn't restrict me in who I suggest as an expert, as long as the conflict of interest is okay. That's a very important point, of course.
I mean, just to add to that, we also have other mechanisms to involve experts besides what Dieter already mentioned. We have a very large database with experts that we can nominate ourselves as EMA, and that can be used for the scientific advisory groups. They can be used ad hoc for specific procedures, be it in contact with the member of the working party or other committees or working parties. So we have a number of mechanisms to involve experts not necessarily nominated by national competent authorities, and we are constantly looking for ways to enlarge this bucket, but not necessarily by being member of a working party. This is not the only way we involve experts.
As was mentioned earlier, we also go through learned societies, and in interaction with healthcare professionals in general, we don't necessarily restrict ourselves to members appointed. But I understand the frustration of having to go through an agency to be maybe more visible. But there are other ways, so you have to look at them.
Rob Glenn from King's College London Commercialisation Team. I'm interested in the obligations of confidentiality that you as an individual may have when you sit on the working parties and the committees. Could you explain a bit about how that's handled? Because you may come into contact with information that is commercially sensitive during your tenure on these committees.
Yeah, so first of all, we have on a yearly basis that we have to submit again our conflict of interest and declaration of interests. In our case in Belgium, not only to the European Medicines Agency, but also to the national agency. So we have to apply twice, let's say, for a conflict of interest. Of course, I think in these things, personal ethics is very important. And indeed, we do see not only as a member, but also the assessors we involve, we do see quite some potentially confidential and commercially sensitive information. It is, of course, important that you have the personal ethics not to misuse that, even if it would not formally be written down in any conflict of interest because you don't have stock or anything like that, or no official appointment in a company. It is, of course, important that you do not leak that information to other companies or other people who are present in the field. But that, I think, is true for everybody involved in these processes. you need, of course, to have the correct personal ethics not to do that. But yeah, I can't say much more on that, except for the fact that for me personally, and I think for all my colleagues, that we are very careful with that.
So you're relying primarily on personal integrity. There's no legal confidentiality.
Well, of course there is. Of course there is legal, but of course it has to be traceable before it can come to some legal activities, right? So I think besides the legal aspects, that personal ethics are maybe even more important than the legal obligations. But of course there is legal obligations, and we do sign, of course, confidentiality documents.
I mean, this is perhaps one of the issues that came into the spotlight a year and a half ago, about how long this confidentiality should last. And in our documents, we had included the fact that this confidentiality should last a lifetime. And of course, this is something that we are reflecting upon, because, as Dieter also said, there is a moment in which indeed the confidentiality ceases to exist. Let's say the moment a product is actually approved and all the information that you have come into contact has been made public, that kind of, cease to make any sense. But this is not what our legal commitment and documents say at the moment, but it's something we are reflecting upon.
Just to say, we should not mix two different things. One is the duty of confidentiality, which is a lifetime and has no limit. And the other one is declaration of interest, for which there are timelines, because after some time we consider that the interest is not an obstacle to the participation of the expert. So there are two different things. They are combined in documents, but they are two different concepts, in fact.
I have just a curiosity, is a semantic curiosity. Why scientific advice, when it is asked for orphan medicine, is called protocol assistance?
I can't help you there, but...
Wisdom of the legislator.
There was an intention, in fact. Scientific advice was more on request from company, and sort of, if you don't want it, you're free not to ask. Protocol assistance, as its name indicate, was support given to companies with less experience, because rare disease, very often you have small, startup, you have companies with less experience of the regulatory world. And we thought it was important, and I would say this is the intermediate step between scientific advice and prime. Prime is even more support for unmet needs. But you see the support given by regulators is increasing with certain types of products.
Other questions?
Thank you again, Dubravka, HMA. I would just like to inform you how we do it at our NCA. The situation is basically the same as in Belgium, but we use, as regards declarations of interest, we use another level of a safeguard. When there is a meeting of advisory body, we always ask ad hoc if there are some conflicts of interest as regards the agenda for the meeting itself, every time.